My name is Evelyn Carter, though folks around town call me Granny Evie. I turned 87 not long ago. I'm a tiny woman 5 feet tall, my skin freckled from the sun and my hands thick and callous from decades of hard work. My hair used to be jet black. Now it's white as cotton and I pin it up in a tight bun to keep cool in our summers. People often tell me my eyes are the thing they remember most, brown eyes that seem to look right through you. Maybe that's because I learned early on to watch people closely, to read what might be coming so I could protect myself. I want to hear about you as well, whoever's listening. Where in America are you watching from? What's your name, friend? Say hello in the comments. I like to imagine my voice reaching places an old woman from a little Mississippi town never had the chance to visit. Maybe one of you lives close to Westbrook and has tasted my special jambalaya at the restaurant. Or maybe you've had my pulled pork and cornbread that folks always lick their plates clean for. If that's you, I'd be so pleased I'd want to hug you. Right now I live in a modest, roomy house on the edge of Westbrook. Nothing fancy, but compared to the tiny maid's room I once slept in, it feels like a palace. I take pride in my yard and tend it with my own hands. I grow every herb and seasoning I use. Basil, oregano, rosemary, sage, mint, and the old medicinal herbs I learned about as a girl: chamomile, lemon balm, lemongrass, rue. More plants than you can imagine. In a tucked-away corner I still keep a little Jason plant that once saved me when I needed saving most. My kitchen is the heart of this house. I cook over a wood-burning stove I had made to match the one I used as a child, the same slow, steady heat that brings out the best flavor. There's a smell I adore. Wood smoke mingled with fresh herbs. I have a regular stove and a refrigerator too. But nothing beats food made slowly on the wood stove with patience and love. And in that kitchen I keep a treasure. A small wooden mortar and pestle I've had since I was 15. It's worn and smooth from years of use, and I wouldn't trade it for anything. It's how I ground the spices that made folks come from miles around. It even had a little secret compartment underneath once. Empty now, but it held things no one would have guessed. My restaurant, Flavors of the Earth, grew from a tiny rented room with one old stove and a couple of tables into 6 places across Mississippi. People travel for my cooking. I've served politicians, television personalities, singers. Anyone with a connection in town ends up at my table. Some swear my chicken and dumplings are the best in America. Others insist no gumbo compares to mine. The secret, I tell folks, is the spices, the patience, and a few herbs only I know how to use just right. Success never changed me. I'm still Granny Evie, getting up at dawn to harvest herbs and test the next recipe. I don't spend whole days in the kitchen anymore. My legs won't allow it, but I still make certain special dishes myself when guests arrive from out of town. More than anything, I take pride in hiring women who've been through hard times the way I was. Every woman who works for me has a story of suffering. That's what makes me proud. Seeing women come in with their heads down and after a few months, walk out holding their heads high, smiling and making plans. I call them my heart daughters. I've helped over 200 women get back on their feet. Some have become managers, others opened businesses, and a few even went to culinary school in the capital. Watching them thrive feels almost better than my own success. People have called me a hero, but I don't see it that way. I just remember what it's like to be alone and desperate, standing at the edge, thinking there's no way out. I also know that sometimes an old wooden mortar and pestle and knowledge of certain plants can be the only help you get. When folks ask how I escaped that life and built all this, I tell them the usual things: hard work, persistence, never giving up. That's what everyone wants to hear. But the whole truth is different. I've carried a secret for more than 60 years, afraid of judgment, of being condemned or worse, not believed. Even my granddaughter, who's filming this little piece of my life, has never heard the whole story. Today I'm going to unburden myself. This isn't a pretty tale, nor a bedtime story. It's a cruel one from a time when poor girls like me counted for very little, and when justice belonged only to the powerful. In 1952, I was 14 and living in a place called Brookhaven up in the north of the state. My father had died of a strange fever 2 years earlier, and my mother was trying to raise 8 children alone. Hunger was a constant. We lived in a small wooden shack with a dirt floor and all of us slept in one room, but at least we were together. I thought I had affection and protection, or at least I believed I did. One day a man named Henry Wallace drove up in a shiny car and told Mama he owned a boarding house in Westbrook and needed a girl my age to help cook. He promised a monthly wage and a chance to go to school. A miracle for a family like ours. Mama with a heavy heart agreed. One less mouth to feed and maybe a better life for me. How could that go wrong? It did. I packed the few things I owned, tucked my grandmother's mortar and pestle into my bundle so it wouldn't break, and climbed into the back of a truck bound for a town I'd never heard of to work for a man I didn't know. I didn't have the faintest idea of the hell that waited for me there. I couldn't imagine that the choice would change my life in ways no one would predict, that I, a skinny girl who barely knew how to write her name, would end up judge, jury, and executioner of 5 powerful men, that I would become the death they never saw coming, served in a steaming cup each morning. I'll tell everything straight, no hiding. How they treated me, what they made me endure, and how slowly I found a way to deliver a kind of justice that no one would give me. Justice taken in small sips, coffee with the bitter taste of revenge. But first I need to go back to the beginning, or none of this will make sense. I was born in a place so small, Brookhaven, it hardly shows up on a map. My father, Thomas Reed, had scraped together a tiny plot of rocky land after years of working for others. The soil was poor, but it was ours. Daddy got up before dawn and came home long after sunset. Sometimes we'd go all day barely seeing him. He spoke little, but his hands were steady and his heart was good. Mama, Lillian Reed, ran the house and took in laundry from wealthier families. She'd trudge to the river and wash clothes under the hot sun, returning with her hands cracked and red from the harsh soap. She never complained, she always said, "As long as I have my health, we have plenty." Though real plenty was something we never knew. There were 8 of us, stair-steps in age. I was the 3rd daughter. Above me were Samuel and Ethan. They'd been working in the fields since they were small. After me came my sister Laura, then Benjamin, Rachel, Michael, David, and little Maggie, who was born the year before Daddy died. By the time Maggie arrived, Mama was so worn out she had little milk to give her. We fed the baby goats milk from a crudely made wooden bottle when we could. We didn't have much, but we had small joys I miss now. The smell of earth after rain. Rare in Mississippi, that felt like a blessing, the kids running out to feel the rain on their faces, the dust turning to mud, the birds singing like a choir. You couldn't organize better. Food was scarce, but what we had tasted of survival. Slow-cooked beans on the wood stove with a little pork fat and a sprig of rosemary Mama grew, boiled potatoes melting in your mouth, and cornbread only on very special days when the fields cooperated. The scent of that bread baking in the wood oven would fill the whole shack and we'd press our noses to the oven's crack, waiting like it was a miracle. Morning started with the rooster's crow, as punctual as a clock, then the cows mooing for milking, goats, the pig snuffling in its pen, and a chorus of birds. Thrushes, cardinals, bluebirds. We were poor, yes, but in our own way we were happy. Everything shifted when Daddy got sick in 1950. I just turned 12. It began with a fever that wouldn't break. He who'd never spent a day in bed couldn't rise. He trembled so hard it seemed his bones might shatter. He sweated cold, then burned up in fever that a wet cloth couldn't ease. Mama tried everything. Herbal teas, clay and herb poultices on his feet the old midwife recommended. Nothing worked. Mama sold the only 2 items of value she owned, her wedding ring and a small silver crucifix from her grandmother, to pay for a wagon to take Daddy into town to see the doctor. I remember him hauled in, too weak to walk, sunken eyes and yellowed skin. The doctor tested him and gave costly medicines but said he couldn't be sure what it was, typhoid, malaria, maybe something else. Daddy came home and never rose again. He wasted away until one frosty June morning he drew his last breath. We couldn't afford a proper wake. Neighbors helped nail together a coffin from old boards, and he was buried under a yellow magnolia in the little community cemetery. Mama cried in that quiet way of someone who knows she can't afford to collapse because 8 children depend on her. After Daddy died, poverty went from a companion to a ruthless master. With no man out in the fields, food became rarer. Mama washed more laundry from dawn to night, but it was never enough. Samuel and Ethan tried to keep the farm running, but they were too young and inexperienced. Harvests failed. We sold animals one by one to put food on the table. It soon became clear we couldn't keep all the children at home. The first to leave was my sister Laura, a year younger than me. A merchant family in town needed a child to help with their little ones and offered room, board, and some old clothes in exchange. They didn't promise wages. Mama packed Laura's small bundle with silent tears, telling herself and her daughter, It's for your own good. Laura was 11 when she left and didn't see us again for almost 3 years. That's where I'll stop for now, but remember my name. I'm Evelyn Carter, Granny Evie. If you're still with me, I'll tell you what happened at the boarding house and how those years shaped the life I lead now. It was my brother David's turn next. He was just 10 when they sent him to work on a cattle farm, sleeping in the barn alongside the hired hands. Every now and then he'd scratch out a letter to Mama, but his handwriting was shaky, the kind of scrawl that came from someone who had barely learned his letters. That's how it went for us. 2 more of my brothers and sisters were handed over to wealthy families who promised they'd be well fed, given clothes, maybe even taught to read. Promises. Afterward, we hardly heard a word about them. I knew my turn would come soon. Mama always put the rest of us first, but I could see her body giving out. Her hands bent and swollen from scrubbing laundry in the freezing river. Her back stooped, her eyes puffy from the tears she tried to hide. Poor girls like me rarely stayed home long. It was common to end up as maids in someone else's house or minding someone else's children until we were old enough to marry and start the whole cycle again. That September he appeared. Mr. Henry Wallace came riding in on a sleek black horse, starched shirt pressed crisp, felt hat perched on his head. In our part of the world where folks walked barefoot in patched clothes, he looked like royalty. At the general store he asked about families with daughters who could cook, girls who wanted an opportunity in the city. The storekeeper, Mr. Allen, pointed him straight to our house. I remember Henry sitting on our porch, sipping the weak coffee Mama served him. "Mrs. Reed," he said smoothly, "I heard you've got a talented daughter who knows her way around a kitchen. I run a boarding house down in Westbrook, the Good Rest, and I'm looking for an honest young lady to help in the kitchen." His words dripped like honey as he looked from Mama to me, watching me tremble as I poured his cup. He explained that his boarding house was respectable, full of merchants, farmers, even the occasional politician. He said he needed an assistant cook, someone quick to learn, neat and polite. He promised a room, meals, clean clothes, and wages at the end of each month. "And if you want," he added, "there's a school in town. You could study, become a real lady." For a family like ours, it sounded like heaven sent. Mama wanted to believe it, and I, foolish as I was, believed it too. I thought I'd work hard, but at least I'd have food every day, maybe send money back home, maybe even learn to read properly. The decision was made that very afternoon. The next morning I would leave with him. That night I packed my bundle. 2 patched dresses, my one good Sunday outfit, a broken comb, and my grandmother's wooden mortar and pestle. I tied them all into a burlap sack and laid awake, hardly sleeping. Mama spent the hours teaching me her recipes and reminding me over and over. Be honest, work hard, prove you're worthy of the chance. The farewell the next morning tore me apart. Samuel and Ethan were already in the fields. They gave me a quick hug and turned away, hiding their feelings because men were taught not to show them. The little ones didn't understand. Rachel, only 8, clung to my skirt and refused to let go. Michael, just 6, hid under the bed and wouldn't come out. Maggie, 3 years old, sobbed in my arms, begging me not to go. Mama held herself together, but I saw her lips tremble, her eyes glisten when she hugged me tight. She whispered, "Be strong, my daughter. May God and Our Lady protect you." Then she slipped a tiny fabric sachet around my neck, a little pouch with a prayer and a pinch of soil from our land. "So you never forget where you came from," she said. I carried that sachet for years, until it was taken from me along with my dignity. I climbed into the back of the truck, sitting among sacks of supplies, while Henry rode beside us on his horse. As we pulled away, I turned back and saw Mama standing in front of our shack with the little ones clutching her skirt, all of them waving. That was the last time I ever laid eyes on them. The picture is still burned into my memory, sharp as if it happened yesterday. The trip took 2 days, jolting along dirt roads full of holes, dust thick in the air, the sun beating down. At night we camped by the roadside. The men built a fire and Henry had me cook rice, beans, and jerky. I curled up in the back of the truck afterward, using my sack for a pillow, wrapped in my thin blanket. No one bothered me, but I had a gnawing unease in my gut, a warning I couldn't put into words. We reached Westbrook late on the 2nd day. It was the first large town I'd ever seen. For a country girl like me, it was overwhelming. The noise, the people, the rows of houses, the cars and trucks rattling down the streets. I followed Henry nervously, clutching my bundle like a lost pup. The Good Rest boarding house sat a little ways from the town center. It was a weathered old mansion painted faded blue. A porch running along the front, a big yard out back. From far away it looked inviting, but up close I saw the peeling paint, the neglected garden, the loose porch boards. Inside, the air smelled of damp and cigarette smoke. The front room doubled as reception and dining hall. Old chairs, a long table for meals, a corner table with bottles of liquor. Down the hall were about 10 small guest rooms, bare but serviceable, most without bathrooms. At the end of the corridor 2 shared bathrooms served everyone. Off to the right was the kitchen, large but dim, with a heavy wood stove, a rusty gas stove, a scarred wooden table, and shelves stacked with pots and supplies. That would become my world for years. Behind the kitchen was a cramped little room with 3 thin mattresses on the floor. "This is where you'll sleep," Henry told me. The other girls were already there. Nora, about 20, who'd worked the longest, Claudia, near 30, who handled the laundry, and Claire, close to my age, who did a bit of everything. They all had the same downcast eyes, the same way of walking with heads low and voices hushed. That first night, lying on my mattress listening to strange sounds in that big house, fear crept in. But I told myself it was only nerves from being somewhere new. Henry asked for my papers that first day. I only had my birth certificate, old and frayed. "I'll keep it safe," he said, sliding it into a folder. I never saw it again. Work started before sunrise. Stoking the stove, brewing coffee, making porridge and bread for breakfast, helping Nora with lunch, washing, scrubbing, serving, cooking dinner, cleaning late into the night. In the beginning I held on to hope. I thought if I proved myself hardworking I'd be rewarded. When I asked timidly about school, Henry brushed me off, saying I needed to focus on my duties first. At the end of the month I asked quietly about wages. His laugh still chills me. "Payment? You haven't even covered the cost of bringing you here, or the food you eat or the bed you sleep in. All that costs money, girl. It'll take a long time before you earn a penny." I tried to argue, but he cut me down with a hard glare. "If you don't like it, leave. But you've got no money, no papers, and nowhere to go. How do you plan on walking back home?" He turned away, ending the conversation. That's when I understood. I wasn't an employee. I was trapped. His promises weren't worth the spit it took to say them, and worse was still coming. Soon I noticed the stares, not just from Henry but from certain guests. They lingered, roving up and down my body with a hunger that had nothing to do with food. 5 men came regularly. They formed a sort of club. Henry himself, of course, sweating and red-faced, his sausage-thick fingers flashing a gold pinky ring. Then there was Colonel James Whitaker, not a real colonel but a wealthy 65-year-old farmer, gaunt and tall, with ice-clear eyes that looked soulless. Rumors swirled that he'd had men killed for less than an argument. Next was Frank Dalton, a cattle trader in his 40s, with a neck as thick as a tree trunk and hands like hammers. Quiet when sober, but once he drank, and he always drank, he turned into a brute. He'd killed 2 men in bar fights and walked free both times. There were 2 more, but I'll come to them in time. For now I'll tell you this. The trap had snapped shut, and the worst of it was only beginning. Owen Mitchell was the kind you wouldn't think twice about if you passed him on the street. The town's bank manager, always neat in a pressed suit, hair slicked back with pomade, shoes shined so bright you could see your face in them. He carried himself like a gentleman, smiling wide for everyone he met. He'd tip his hat to men working in the fields, greet housemaids with a "Good morning, how are you?" and sit with his wife, daughter of a wealthy farmer, and their 3 children in the front pew at church each Sunday. But behind that polished mask was the cruelest of the lot. He was the one you never suspected, and maybe that's what made him the most dangerous. And then there was Dr. Isaac Foster, the town physician. He was in his mid-50s, a widower with a big house off the square. Sometimes I swore I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes. Once, after Ambrose beat me so badly I could hardly stand, the doctor slipped me a painkiller, as if that little pill could make up for the things he did himself. The 5 of them gathered once a month, always under the full moon. Colonel Whitaker was superstitious, claimed the moon made men stronger, more virile. They called it the Friends' Dinner. But for us, the girls, it was the night of terror. It began like any other evening, with food Henry Wallace made sure was the best he had. Roast suckling pig, fried chicken, jambalaya with fine cured meat. Whiskey flowed, locked away until those nights. Wine, beer, laughter, stories, cards. On the surface it looked like nothing more than men enjoying a feast. But once the whiskey settled in and the card games wrapped up, Henry would stand with a grin that made my stomach turn. He'd clap his hands 3 times, sharp and loud. That was our signal. We were summoned, Nora, Claudia, me, and whatever girl had been dragged into that house most recently. We lined up, heads bowed, shaking. They circled us like cattlemen at an auction, pointing, commenting, arguing over who looked fresh that night. Sometimes they placed bets right there at the table. The winner got first pick. Other times they fought amongst themselves like dogs over a bone. Being the youngest, I was the one they quarreled over most. The tender meat's always sweetest, Colonel Whitaker liked to sneer. His liquor and cigar breath hot in my face as he stroked my cheek. Still green, Frank Dalton would grunt, pinching me so hard he left bruises on my arms and thighs. Owen would play the kind uncle, offering a piece of candy, murmuring, "Come here, darling, I'll treat you nice." But his sweetness ended the moment a door shut behind him. Dr. Foster stood off to the side, head bowed like he wanted to look away, but he never did. And Henry, well, he didn't pretend. He reminded us often that he'd bought us, so he owned us body and soul. The first time they named me, I panicked. I screamed, begged, tried to dart back to the kitchen. Ambrose caught me with one hand like I was nothing more than a rag doll. My thrashing only made them laugh. "That's it, boys," Whitaker said. "They fight, it's sweeter." Henry claimed his rights as owner, declaring he'd go first while the others watched. They carried me into his room, tossed me onto the bed. I tried to cover myself, but what good was that? I was a 14-year-old girl against 5 men grown and powerful. Henry opened only what was necessary of his clothes, keeping the rest on like he was too busy to bother. He sweated over me, whispering filth in my ear about how I belonged to him, how he'd brought me all the way from Brookhaven just to break me in. The others stood around with their drinks, jeering, coaching, giving instructions as if it were some game. When Henry was done, he straightened his clothes and bragged like he'd conquered something noble. The others clapped mocking applause. "Whose turn now?" he asked like he was offering slices of pie. Whitaker stepped forward. He wasn't interested in pretending. He yanked my hair until strands tore free, sank his teeth into my shoulders and arms, pressed his hand on my throat until I nearly blacked out. "Cry louder," he demanded when I tried to stifle my sobs. I liked the sound. Dalton came next. He didn't need to pin me. His weight crushed me flat. His whiskey breath made me gag. He was careless, violent, and when drink robbed him of the ability to finish, he turned on me in fury, slapping, punching, calling me the reason for his weakness. Owen was cruel in another way. He wanted humiliation. He forced me into degrading poses, made me speak vile words, all while wearing that same pleasant smile he showed on Main Street. If I refused, he used his knowledge of the body to inflict pain so sharp it felt like knives under the skin, pain that left no visible trace. He was proud of that, boasting of what he'd learned in school. Dr. Foster was last. By then I was beyond exhaustion, trembling so hard I could barely breathe. He pretended it was clinical, using medical terms as if the words could scrub the reality of what he was doing. "This might be uncomfortable," he'd murmur, acting like he was examining me instead of violating me. And when they finished, they didn't leave. They lingered, drinking, laughing, swapping notes about me like hunters boasting of a kill. They talked about who had done best, who'd take me differently next time. I lay there discarded, nothing more than a body. And sometimes one of them came back for another round, as they called it. What broke me most wasn't just the pain, but their joy in it. The way they reveled in the power, knowing I had no escape, no savior. The following mornings were the cruelest reminder. They'd sit at breakfast as if nothing had happened. Owen returned to the bank, Dr. Foster to his clinic, Whitaker to his farm, Dalton back on the road, Henry barking orders around the boarding house. When our eyes met, Henry would smile that promised another full moon was always coming. And it did. Month after month. Sometimes between moons one would arrive alone, and Henry never denied them. They were his friends, his accomplices, and he helped himself whenever he pleased, snapping his fingers in that secret rhythm that made us freeze. One girl, Claire, the one closest to my age, couldn't take it. After a night when Dalton had been especially savage, she waited until the house went quiet. She tied a sheet to a ceiling beam and ended her life. Henry found her in the morning. They dumped her in a pauper's grave with no name, no prayer, nothing but the tears of the rest of us left behind. Seeing her end like that sparked something inside me. I swore I would not give them that victory. I would not let them break me so far that death seemed like the only way out. I would endure, I would survive, and if a chance came, I'd seize it. After 6 months, I thought I saw that chance. It was a Sunday. Henry had gone off to a cattle auction. Nora was bedridden with fever again. Claudia busy at the wash. No one had eyes on me. I grabbed the bundle I'd hidden, a few coins and my grandmother's mortar and pestle, and climbed out the kitchen window. I vaulted the back wall and ran like my life depended on it. I ran until my feet bled in my worn shoes, the sun baking my skin. For hours I pushed forward, each step a taste of freedom. Then I heard the engine. I ducked into a roadside thicket, heart pounding. The first car sped past. Relief washed over me, until a second one slowed. It was Dalton's truck. He passed once, paused as if he'd sensed something, then moved on. I dared to think I was safe. I left my hiding spot, walked faster, eager to put distance between us. But the engine returned closer now. His truck pulled up beside me. Dalton leapt out, reeking of whiskey even in the morning. "Well, look here," he sneered, yanking my hair. A little mouse trying to slip the trap. He dragged me kicking and screaming to the truck. "Shut that mouth or I'll knock your teeth out," he hissed, tying my wrists and ankles with the same ropes he used for cattle. He gloated all the way back. "Arthur's gonna kill you, girl. And if he doesn't, he'll make you wish he had." When we rolled into the boarding house, Henry was already home. Dalton dragged me inside, threw me on the floor like trash, and shouted for all to hear. "Look what I found trying to run." He kicked me in the ribs to force me up on all fours. Henry didn't hesitate. He called for the others, Whitaker, Owen, Foster. My punishment was about to begin. Henry Wallace wanted everyone to watch. He wanted my punishment to be a warning, a lesson carved into my skin for the rest of the girls. They tied me to a chair in the middle of the common room, and one by one they beat me. Belts, fists, boots, whatever they could grab. Colonel Whitaker used his riding crop, striking with a cold precision. Frank Dalton swung a length of wet rope that stung like fire every time it struck. Owen Mitchell relied on his hands, heavy with gold rings that split my skin open with each blow. Dr. Isaac Foster hit the least, but he didn't abstain. His strikes landed all the same. And Henry, he favored his belt, the one with the big brass buckle, the one he always bragged about. He whipped me until my body gave out, and the world went black. When I woke, I was in the cellar. A damp, rotting hole where spoiled food and broken crates were dumped. They left me there 2 weeks. Once a day, someone shoved a scrap of food and a tin cup of water through the door. The rest of the time it was just me, the dark, and the scratching of rats. By the time they dragged me out, I was skin and bone. My hair came out in handfuls, my skin was jaundiced, and my ribs jutted sharp beneath my blouse. But the worst wasn't what showed on the outside. Something inside me had shattered. The girl who once believed in kindness had been buried in that cellar. I went back to work. Cooking, cleaning, serving, and enduring, but I wasn't the same. My fear had hardened into something else. Cold. Sharp. A rage that burned steady and quiet, waiting. I swore I would survive, and I swore one day they would pay. About a month later, I met the woman who changed everything. Miss Janice. She was old, her hands wrinkled like bark, and she knew every herb and root that grew in the southern woods. Once a week she came to the boarding house with jars and bundles. Teas for upset stomachs, salves for wounds, tonics for men who wanted more fire in their step. Henry allowed her inside because her remedies worked, and because she minded her own business, or seemed to. But her eyes missed nothing. She saw our lowered heads, the bruises we tried to hide, the way we flinched whenever one of the men came near. One day, as I carried her baskets to the kitchen, she caught my arm. She looked straight into me with those bright, knowing eyes and whispered, "I know what happens here, child. You don't deserve this. None of you do." For a moment I froze. It had been so long since anyone had spoken to me like I was human. My throat ached with the urge to cry, but I swallowed it down. "I can't take you out," she murmured, her grip firm and gentle at once. They're powerful men with friends in the law. But I can give you tools. She slipped a little cloth pouch into my palm. For the pain. Boil it in water. Drink it when you need. Her eyes glinted. And remember, even the smallest herb can bring down the mightiest man if you know how to use it. At the time I thought she meant courage. Only later did I learn she meant poison. That night, lying on my thin mattress while Henry's snores rattled down the hall, I made a vow. I wouldn't die in that place. I wouldn't end like Claire swinging from a sheet. I would endure, bide my time, and when the moment came I'd deliver justice with my own hands. Thursdays became the only day I looked forward to. While I helped Miss Janice unload her jars, she taught me in whispers. At first it was harmless. Teas for internal bruises, ointments for the ache they left behind. But little by little her lessons changed. She spoke of the dual nature of plants, that the same flower that heals can also kill. She showed me gyson, a common little blossom with white and purple petals. Pretty, isn't it? She said. But in the right dose it leaves no trace. Looks like fate stepped in. I learned how to gather it, how to dry it, how to boil it down with alcohol until it thickened into a poison invisible in taste or smell. I hid it in the only place they never thought to check, the false bottom of my grandmother's wooden mortar and pestle. My plan grew slowly, careful as a seed pushing through soil. I knew I couldn't strike them all at once. It had to look natural, like age, like bad luck. And I knew who had to go first: Dr. Foster. A doctor falling ill would raise no suspicion. So I began adding a pinch of powder to his morning coffee. Just enough to build up in his blood. At first, nothing happened and doubt gnawed at me. But by the third month, he complained of aching joints, of fatigue. By the sixth, he was thin and sallow, with fevers and night sweats. The others teased him, calling him old and weak. 8 months in, he was found dead in his bed, mouth open in a frozen scream. Another doctor signed the certificate. Generalized infection of unknown origin. I poured coffee at the wake with steady hands. Frank Dalton was next. His liver was already ruined from drink, so the poison worked faster. It started as hangover symptoms: nausea, headaches, fatigue. Nobody thought twice. But soon his skin turned yellow, his belly swelled, his eyes bloodshot. Henry scolded him for drinking too much, never knowing the truth. 14 months after I began, Dalton collapsed at a cattle auction, foaming at the mouth. The doctors called it liver failure. The town called it whiskey's revenge. Colonel Whitaker was harder. Lean and wiry, suspicious of everything, careful about what he ate and drank. I dosed him slow, grain by grain. Over time his cough grew worse, his breath short, his temper shorter. He struck us harder on the nights he couldn't perform. 21 months in, he collapsed at the dinner table, his face purple, gasping for air. The doctor wrote pulmonary emphysema on the certificate. No family came to claim him. Owen Mitchell came next. The bank manager tried to hide his failing health, slipping away for secret appointments, swallowing pills in the dark. His chest pains grew worse than fainting spells. He stopped showing up at the boarding house except to drink and talk. The others mocked him as weak. After 2 years and 4 months, he dropped dead at his desk in the middle of the bank, papers scattering like leaves. His wife wept politely, his grown children whispering over inheritance. No one mentioned the boarding house. And then there was only Henry Wallace. The fat, blustering man who once filled a room with his voice had shriveled to a bent shell. 3 years after I began, he was gaunt, his skin sagging in folds, his body failing piece by piece. Headaches, stomach pains, blurred vision. Nothing cured him. He prayed, begged doctors, made bargains with God. Nothing worked. But even sick, even hollowed out, he didn't stop. He still called us in, still used us. And when he leaned over me, sweating and gasping, I didn't cry anymore. I stared into his eyes and let the faintest smile curl at the corner of my mouth, because I knew. Each day, each breath, each sip of coffee brought him closer to the end. And in the end it came just as I had planned. One morning, I carried Henry Wallace's coffee down the hall like I always did. 2 knocks on the door, silence. I tried again, louder, still nothing. So I eased the door open. He was stretched out in bed, eyes wide open and staring at the ceiling, his face twisted in agony. He'd been gone for hours. His body was already stiff. I just stood there, staring at the shell of the man who had tormented me for years, and all I felt was peace. Pure quiet peace. He's dead. Someone get a doctor. I cried, slipping easily into the role of the panicked maid. On the nightstand sat the cup of coffee I had laced with a little more poison than usual, still untouched. Nobody noticed it in the chaos. When the doctor finally came, he shook his head in disbelief. "I've never seen anything like this," he muttered. His organs all failed at once: heart, kidneys, liver, lungs. Everything just stopped. He glanced around the room, baffled. "Did he take anything unusual?" "Just his regular breakfast, doctor," I answered, keeping my gaze low, playing the obedient servant they always thought I was. "Tell me something. Do you believe I was wrong? I killed 5 men one by one, watching them waste away while I poured their morning coffee with a smile. Was I a murderer, or did I deliver justice the world never would? What would you have done, standing in my shoes, knowing they'd keep destroying girls like me? When Henry died, everything changed. We learned he had no close family. Only some nephew from Atlanta showed up, sneered at us, and sold the place off. Uncle's protégés. He called us like we were scraps of meat. The boarding house was turned into a warehouse, and we were dismissed with a single month's wages, the first and only pay most of us had ever seen. For the first time in 3 years I was free. Truly free. But freedom felt heavy. I had no home, no skills beyond scrubbing and cooking, and nowhere to go. 17 years old, with a body and soul aged far beyond my years. That's when Miss Janice stepped in again. "I don't have a palace," she said, "but I've got a little corner for you." Her small cottage on the edge of Westbrook was like paradise after hell. The yard bloomed with herbs, spices, and healing plants. A little garden out back kept us fed. Simple, yes, but to me it felt like heaven. Living with Miss Janice, I learned more than how to kill. I learned how to heal, how to soothe fevers, dress wounds, brew teas that calmed a body. She taught me recipes passed down through her mother and grandmother. She even taught me how to truly cook. Not just to feed bellies, but to stir joy into a dish. One day she said, "I know the owner of Country Flavor, that little restaurant nearby. He needs a kitchen hand. I told him about you." Mr. Juvencio was an old widower who had built the place after retiring from the railroads. He gave me a chance, though I was just a skinny girl with no formal training. I started washing dishes and peeling potatoes, but he soon noticed the way I seasoned even the simplest stew. "Where'd you learn to cook like that, girl?" he'd ask. I'd smile softly. "From the women in my family." Which was true enough: my mother, my grandmother threw their old mortar and pestle, and Miss Janice, who had become a second mother to me. Bit by bit, I rose from assistant to cook, then to head cook. People came not just to eat but to taste my food. "I want that roast only Geraldine makes," they'd say. "Bring me those beans with Geraldine's seasoning." My name became a promise of flavor. But no matter how much success I tasted, my thoughts kept drifting back to my family. The homestead in Brookhaven, my mother, my brothers, my sisters. I saved what little I could and finally made the trip. This time I walked the road not as a tricked little girl but as a free woman. Brookhaven looked the same. Tiny houses, a quiet square, the same white church. At Mr. Antoner's store, now run by his son, I asked about my family. He frowned, trying to recall. "Oh, Manuel's people? They scattered after his widow, Irene, passed. Been years now." Struck me like a blade. My mother had died never knowing the truth, never knowing her daughter lived, or the hell she'd endured. Perhaps it was better that way, that she had believed I was safe somewhere. My older brothers had gone to Jackson. The girls had married and scattered. The youngest, no one knew. I thought of searching, but how could I explain where I'd been, what I'd done? Some stories weigh too much to share, even with blood. I returned to Westbrook with a strange kind of peace, knowing no one waited for me anymore. For the first time I was completely free. That's when I started helping women like me. The first was Juliet, who stumbled into the restaurant covered in bruises, running from a husband's fists. I fed her, gave her a cot in the back, and helped her find work. Then came Margaret, just 15, sold by her stepfather into a brothel but lucky enough to escape. I gave her shelter and taught her to cook. One by one they came, drawn, it seemed, by some invisible signal among the broken. "Find Geraldine at Country Flavor. She'll help you," they whispered to each other. And I did, offering food, a bed, a job, or just a shoulder to cry on. And behind every act of kindness, I carried the certainty that poisoning those 5 men had been worth it. Because how many girls would they have destroyed if I hadn't? Henry's last coffee had freed more than just me. I never lost sleep over it, never once regretted their deaths. But I also never told a soul until now. Some stories must be buried until the world is safe enough to hear them. I worked at Country Flavor nearly 7 years. I saved every penny I could, tucking it away in a jam jar buried behind Miss Janice's house. My dream was to have a place of my own. Mr. Juvencio was kind, teaching me not just cooking but how to run a business. When age and illness caught up with him, he sat me down. "Geraldine," he said, "I'm selling the restaurant. I'd like it to go to someone who'll care for it like I have." My savings weren't even half of what he asked. I told Miss Janice, disheartened. She surprised me. She lifted a trapdoor in her floor, pulled out a box filled with old jewels, coins, and bills. "This is my insurance," she said softly. "But I see you need it more." With her loan, every penny of which I later repaid, I bought the restaurant. It was modest. 10 tables, a small kitchen, and faithful regulars. At first, I kept the name out of respect, but after Mr. Juvencio passed, I renamed it Flavors of the Earth. First, I ran it alone, barely scraping by. Then Rita came, her face purple with bruises, 2 little ones clinging to her skirts. She begged for a chance, any chance. I gave her a job in the small back room to stay in. She was the first. Then came Josephine, assaulted by her employer. Mary Carmen, fleeing years of abuse. Louise, tricked into prostitution. Connie, abandoned at 16 with a baby. One after another, women came, as if following that same unspoken signal. "Go to Geraldine at Flavors of the Earth. She'll help you." And I always did. And I gave whatever I could: food, a place to sleep, a bit of work, or just a shoulder for someone to lean on, along with hard-won advice from my own scars. At first it was all temporary: meals, a cot, small tasks. But soon I realized I needed something bigger, something structured. That's how my hiring rule was born. Only women, especially those who'd been knocked down, who needed more than wages, they needed a new beginning. I taught them how to cook, how to serve, how to handle the books. But most of all, I taught them how to value themselves again, to stand taller, to believe they deserved a dignified life. The restaurant became known not just for its food, which people already called some of the best around, but for its warmth, its kindness, its spirit. Women who came broken found a home. They found sisters, not judges. Success grew slowly, then all at once. We tore down the wall next door and doubled the dining room. The kitchen expanded too, so more women could learn. Invitations started rolling in for birthdays, graduations, even weddings. At first, I went myself with a couple of helpers. Then the demand was so high I had to form teams just for events. That meant more training, more jobs, more lives changed. Money, once scarce, began to flow. I invested in better tools, fresher ingredients, proper training. I bought a little pickup for supplies and deliveries. I built myself a modest house with a yard where I grew herbs and seasonings. By the time the restaurant turned 5, I was 32 and ready for the next step. That's when I founded the Flavors and Knowledge Foundation. A restaurant could only do so much. We needed a school. First, it was just 10 students using our kitchen. But it worked. So I bought land on the edge of Westbrook and built a space with an industrial kitchen, classrooms, dorms, and even a daycare. So no woman had to choose between her child and her future. We grew from there. Sponsorships, donations, even city support. We hired teachers, expanded the lessons, cooking, yes, but also business, marketing, entrepreneurship. Our women left not just as cooks but as leaders, ready to open shops of their own. And they did. Restaurants, bakeries, catering services sprouted across the region. Before long, we were a network. I unified them under the Flavors of the Earth name. One brand, one promise of quality. A shared menu with local touches. In return, each business gave a small portion back to the foundation. Soon, 6 restaurants carried the name across Mississippi. Not an empire, but more than I ever dreamed of. And more important than the restaurants were the women. Over 200 who'd passed through our doors, most now independent, confident, and free. People sometimes ask if I regret what I did, poisoning those 5 men instead of going to the law. I can only laugh inside. What law? What sheriff would have believed a poor country girl against men with money, land, and influence? If I'd spoken up, I'd have been called a liar, a whore, maybe even ended up dead by the roadside. I did what I had to. And I don't regret it. Not one bit. Each of those men had destroyed dozens of lives. Without me, they would have destroyed dozens more. Dr. Faust, with his white coat, had preyed on patients for years. Ambrose left a trail of battered women in every town. Colonel Justin treated his workers' daughters like cattle. Owen, polished bankman, blackmailed women desperate for loans. And Henry Wallace, he was the spider at the center of it all. The world is lighter without them. Some wonder how no one suspected. But no one notices a cook. To them, I wasn't a person. I was furniture. Invisible. That blindness was my shield. The very thing that let me serve death in plain sight. And yes, I do it again, maybe even more carefully. Because life taught me early. Sometimes you have to be your own savior, your own judge, your own justice. For the young women listening, I leave this. Trust your instincts. That little voice inside that warns you. It's rarely wrong. Don't ignore it out of politeness or fear. Learn to spot the signs. Control jealousy, insults that grow into bruises. Leave while you can. And always have your own money, your own skills, your own independence. That's your shield. Build a circle of women who'll stand with you. And no matter what, never let them strip your dignity. They can take your home, your freedom, even your body. But if you guard your spirit, you can rebuild. I'm 87 now. My hands tremble with the knife, my legs ache after a long day. But my mind is sharp, and my heart still beats strong. I don't run the restaurants anymore. That's for the daughters of my heart. The women I once trained who now run businesses of their own. The foundation has its own board, filled with former students who once arrived broken and now shine as leaders. I still live in the same house I built decades ago with a yard full of herbs. And I still use my grandmother's old mortar and pestle, worn smooth by time. Sometimes when I grind seasonings, I remember what once hid in its secret compartment. The poison that freed me and so many others. I never regretted it. Not once. My name is Geraldine Messiah Quincy, but everyone calls me Granny D. This is my story. A story of pain, yes, but more of survival, of turning poison into nourishment, of transforming scars into strength. And if you'd like to hear more, stay with me here on Mysteries of Grandmothers. Because wisdom doesn't live in books. It lives in stories like these, carried by voices that have lived through fire and still kept the flame alive.